Good evening, and welcome back to the Not So Perfect Bigfoot Show. Tonight, I have a really special show, and this is the first time I've really kind of ventured out of the topic a lot, other than having a show with Tenny Rumble about orbs. Tonight is about owls, synchronicity, losing times, about a man's journey into the unknown, discovering his life. I think you're going to find him very interesting. We have Don with us tonight, the co-host. So I hope you guys will have a lot of questions for him. Kind of let him go into his story and talk about, what he's got going on. If you have questions, put them up there. If I do not get to your questions, please repost them in a few minutes. Before we go into the show, Selena, our sweet Selena, is trying to help a little boy have Christmas. So Gary will be putting her email in the chat tonight. And if you will email her, and if you want to donate, she is going to show everywhere that your donation goes straight from the receipts to the young man receiving it. Every kid deserves Christmas. She's got a big heart. So if you will, either hit Selena up. If you don't know Selena, Gary and Blue will be putting her email in there. Let's give this little boy a very nice Christmas. And now I would like to introduce my guest. My guest is Mike Clelland. Mike is a podcaster and author, a UFO researcher. He is a ultralight backpacker, and I thought you guys would find that to be very fascinating. He loves to camp under the stars. He loves that more than anything in the world. He loves to be close to nature. He is a wilderness adventurer. He knows a lot about what goes on in our wilderness. He has authored several books. One of his books that we're going to focus on tonight is called The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicities, and the UFO Abductee. He has had experience with grays. He does keep a blog. He collects stories all over the world about strange encounters that involve owls. And he's going to dive into that. I'm very excited to have him. He has said he's going to come back on tonight on another show and have backpacking tips, and we're going to explore that. He may give some of that tonight and give tips for the wilderness. I am very impressed with this gentleman, and it is like, to me, is like I feel like a little girl having him on. I just love him. I know you're going to love him. So we're going to bring Don and Mike on. Mike, Don, how are you doing
Hello.
tonight?
Very
Hey,
well. I'm doing well.
hey guys, how you doing?
So, Mike, you have a very interesting story, and we're going to let you start it wherever you like. But your story actually goes back to having experiences as a child, but it was later on in your life when you started piecing things together by keeping a blog. I don't want to scatter your story, but that to me was a very important part. So I want you to pick up wherever you would like to pick up, say as little or as much about you and where people can find you. Your website is in the description of the show, but I just touched on the surface of all the things that you are.
Well, so thank you. Thanks for having me here. And you just chime in and butt in. You're not going to hurt my feelings because I'm my one true skill is being an unstoppable talker once you get me rolling, especially on this subject. So
Yeah.
just you're not going to hurt my feelings. If I get off track, you just butt in and steer me back to where you need me. Um, I have 4 books on owls and UFOs, basically. And then and as you know, it's interesting. This book, The Messengers. I don't know if folks. This book was published 9 years ago. Almost exactly about a week ago. It was 9 years ago, and so and a lot has happened in those last 9 years as far as the track of my life has totally changed, and my total singular focus has been on this type of work. Uh, and so that one book turned into 4 books, and it's a lot. I've a lot of written output that I've done. So this was, if someone had explained this to me like 15 years ago, I would not have believed them. I would not have believed this, like that my life would be in this path that I'm on now. So growing up as a boy, I'm 62 now, as a boy in the early 70s, 1974 really, I had a couple of experiences. One was a missing time event, and that was, I grew up in Southfield, Michigan, totally a suburb of Detroit, and at the time it was completely Leave It to Beaver world, and it was safe. And so on an autumn evening, all the kids from the junior high school would go to the high school football game, and the high school was real close to my house. You could stand in the driveway and hear the football game from the driveway. And so I told my parents I was going to be home at 9:30, and I wanted to be home in time to see a television show. And so I said, I'll be home by 9:30. The show starts at 10 o'clock. And I left the football game with plenty of time. I feel like plenty of time. And then I was walking home with a friend of mine. His name is also Mike. And we got to a point in the neighborhood, just a block down, just down the street from my home. And the sky turned orange, like click, and then went back to normal sky. The whole sky, nighttime sky, turned orange and then went click right back. So it was just 1 second of orange and then back. And I remember both of us kind of doing the little checklist, like what just happened? What was that? And was it lightning? It didn't seem like lightning. There was no sound at all. Didn't seem like lightning. Didn't seem like, we actually talked about it could like one of those transformer things on a telephone pole, could those have exploded or something? But that there was no sound. It didn't make any sense. So he lived a little further into the neighborhood. So I said goodnight at my driveway and walked into the house. And both my parents were standing there waiting for me, and they were angry. And they were like, "What are you doing out so late? You're 12 years old. You shouldn't be out so late." I'm like, "Whoa! I told you I was going to be home at 9:30. It's 9:30." And they pointed to the clock, and it was 11:30. And that didn't make any sense at all. Didn't make any sense at all. Actually, I remember the 11 o'clock news was just ending as I got home. So that at the time, the 11 o'clock news would come on, and then it would end at 11:30. And so, and I had this was well before the concept of missing time was part of the popular vernacular. And and the next Monday at school, so it was interesting. So I felt there was a whole bunch of my parents were angry at me. I knew I didn't do anything wrong. So like I felt like it didn't make sense because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong.
Did you feel anything physically different?
Not
like
that I recall now. Yeah,
okay.
That's 50 years.
Right.
52 years ago. Well, no, 50 years ago. Yeah. And so I as I recall, nothing except everything felt exactly streamlined, smooth, no anything except that it was, the light was jarring, but the emotional stuff of my parents being angry at me and feeling like I didn't deserve it was much more awkward. So the next Monday at school, so the Friday night is the football games. Next Monday at school, I'm with Mike, and we're sitting around the cafeteria, and I said, "Hey, something weird happened on Friday night." And he blurts out, he goes, "Yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything." And I remember thinking to myself, well, I didn't see a UFO. I didn't see any UFO with lights. And my very first thought was, he's lying. He's lying. And I never brought it up again until a couple of years ago. I contacted him, and I said, "Listen, I got to ask, what was going on? Like, do you remember that night?" And he's like, "I have no memory of that night." So I told the story just like I told you here now. And he said, "I don't remember any of that, except I do remember your parents were upset that you were out late. I remember that part." And so in the study of UFOs, that kind of thing where two witnesses, especially years later, will have different memories is very, very common. So I'm not questioning my own memory, but it would have been a nice point of confirmation if he did remember something more, but I can't. So I can't make him remember more. I realize that. Now, I had a few other experiences. Saw a close-up UFO, which was kind of coffee can shaped. As a 12-year-old boy, I was at a friend's Kenny's house. I'm looking around here to see if I have something shaped like a coffee can. Here, I'll use this. So I'm looking out the window, and we walked right up close to the window as a sleepover at his house. He grew up in the same neighborhood as me, and we were right up close to the glass. So I don't think it was anything reflecting behind us. I feel strongly saying that. And this thing was coming down. It wasn't quite water bottle shaped, but it was more like a coffee can. But it was descending and rotating in this eerily smooth way that is different than any other. I mean, this is, again, 50 years ago, and I can clearly remember how unsettling the motion was, because it didn't match a helicopter, it didn't match an airplane in flight, and it didn't even match, it just seemed like it was out of step with our reality in a way, out of phase with our reality in a way. And so we watched it. It wasn't there for very long, and then it just vanished. Now, I used to say the lights went off and we couldn't see it anymore, but that was me lying, because I couldn't. The story was weird, and I couldn't make it more weird by saying it vanished instantly. Click, gone. I've since read plenty of UFO reports and talked to plenty of witnesses that's very common, that something will just disappear. So, Kenny and I worked as a professional illustrator for a long time. So and at the time as a boy, I drew a lot. I was drawing all the time. So I had we had paper and pencil down on the kitchen table. We had been drawing earlier in the day, so we just ran right downstairs, and I drew it. And I still have the image. The image is in the messenger's book, and as well as an updated image that I'm a much more skilled illustrator now. So there's a very clean, tight illustration that I did using Photoshop in the book. I contacted Kenny, this is going back probably close to 10 years now. Yeah, a little over 10 years ago, I contacted Kenny and asked him the same question. Do you remember that night? And he said, no, I don't remember that night at all. And we talked for a while and caught up, and then he said goodbye. And then he called me back a couple days later and he said, I talked to my mom and said, do you remember anything about that night? And she said, yes, I remember you and Mike, Kenny's mom said, you and Mike came downstairs and drew it at the kitchen table. You were both really excited, and I was right there watching you draw it. So that, to me, was a very strong confirmation. So, go ahead.
I can give you a confirmation on that also. When I had Penny Rumble on the show, I don't know if you're familiar with Penny, but she is a MUFON investigator, but she has a book on orbs. She was on the show several months ago, and I think it was on her show where I was talking about an incident right down the street where we had a hunter that was in the stand, and he described exactly what you just showed with the water bottle, that a tubular craft come down and it was spinning, and there was no sound coming from it or anything, but it had hovered over a deer, and he just thought that was the way. And but he actually got it on like a little video. Oh, and he's trying to locate it for us, but it seemed to be like it was following the deer that he was watching. And so that was just down the road from where we live. And when you were doing the circular, motion of it, that's exactly what he described.
Yeah. I have a number of reports of well, it's a normal place to see an owl in the forest, but of powerful, what I call highly charged owl stories. Like, it's one thing to see an owl on a fence off in the distance. It's another thing to have it show up in your life at a very profound moment. So I have two stories of owls that have in a deer stand in a tree. So both of them are quite powerful. And they're very similar. They mirror each other. These two stories arrived in my email inbox very close together. And then the content mirrors each other. That is something that I've noticed in an odd way, that kind of synchronistic arrival of a story, and then a very similar story that somehow mirrors it, or they basically seem to confirm each other's story in a way. So I had those stories in my youth. I have a more telling one when I was 30, which now that I'm 60, that feels like my youth, but it wasn't quite 12. But when I was 30, I was living in upstate Maine. I was living in Steep Falls, Maine. And I was living alone in a house, and it was wintertime, and it would have been 1990, the winter of 92, 93. It would have been January or February of 1993. I can't pinpoint the date exactly. And I sat up in the middle of the night, and the bed was pushed right up against the window. So I sat up and looked out the window, and there was this bright light pouring into the bedroom. And I saw 5 gray beings walking towards the house. And I have this as an illustration in one of the books. These are all in my website, in my blog too, so you can search these out. But I was eerily calm seeing this, like strangely calm. Like it didn't match I should have been freaked out. And it felt like it felt very eerie, but I looked at these 5 beings. They were backlit by this bright light. Now the light was small, right? It looked like it was about the size of a washing machine or something. And it would have been perfect if it was like a flying saucer that was emanating this light. It wasn't. It was just a dot of light in the yard. That these things were backlit, and they were walking towards the house. I was the only one home, and it was very clear who they were coming for. So, and I heard this voice in my head that said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did. I just put my head on my pillow and went right to sleep. Now there was like an eerie silence and a kind of otherworldly quality to that moment, which is very commonly reported now. I recognize that now. I had no idea about that then. And I have, that was one of the questions I used to ask a lot. I don't really ask it as much anymore. Has anyone had this eerie silence, this weird stillness that associates an event? And I've talked to Bigfoot witnesses that talk about this eerie silence. And then fairy researchers, women. I know a woman who researches fairy accounts in England, and there's this eerie silence that can accompany those events also. Now, so these events happen. I could talk about any of these events at length. There's lots more to all of these stories. So that was in my youth, and then in 2006, I was 44 years old. I was living in right near Grand Teton National Park, a really glorious part of the world. So it was right at the corner where Grand Teton National Park butts into Yellowstone. And I was camping a lot, and I worked for an outdoor school. I kind of don't want to use their name. You could find out in about 2 mouse clicks, but it's a big school. And the reason I don't want to use their name is because it's a wonderful school, and I realize how weird my story is, and I don't need to. I haven't worked for the school for 15 years or so, so I'm not. But anyway, so we used to do 30-day trips. I used to go out for 30 days at a time, take students out for 30 days. I do that twice a summer. And now I came, and I was doing it in Alaska and in the Canadian Rockies and in all up and down the Rocky Mountains and in the desert Utah and such. So I came back to my little town in October. I'd been up in Alaska for most of the summer, and then I met this young woman who was working at the school. They had a branch at the school, and she had been there all summer. And I said, "Hey, you've been here all summer. You must have been camping in the Tetons all summer long. That must have been a great summer for you." And she said, "I never went camping once." I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible. I'll take you camping." And I took her camping, like a total stranger. So, which sounds funny. I've told this story to some people. Like, you took someone camping, and I was like, it was kind of camping culture, right? It was like kind of like it would be. I mean, in other places,
wilderness people.
Yeah, exactly. It was camping culture. So, I mean, if you like, it was like, I don't know, going to the beach if you lived in California or something. So, so we went in, and this is when I was really amped about this ultralight backpacking stuff. So we took very little gear, looked at the weather. The weather was going to be perfectly clear. The weather is very consistent in the fall in that part of the world. So we didn't take a tent. We hiked in about 5 or 8 miles and really fast with light packs, and and we didn't leave till lunchtime, and then the sun was setting, and I was cooking on a little camp stove on this big flat rock in this field of wildflowers. It was just glorious. And as the sun was setting, now there's this important detail to this story, which has reverberated throughout my research, and in a funny way, I'm so glad this happened early on. So she and I were talking as the sun was setting, and she said some stuff. She was talking about some stuff, and I was like, whoa, I didn't expect this person to be this insightful or this spiritual or this smart. And so we had this really powerful conversation, and it was as the sun was setting, and then an owl flew right above me, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next 2 hours, as the sun set, these owls continued to fly above us. We were camping in bear country, so we just picked up our where we were cooking. We carried it another mile up or a half mile or so away, and then we stored the food properly, and then we slept out just under the stars. But the owls followed us, and we would lying on our backs. So you'd lie completely on your back and looking up at the stars. This is the Northern Rockies at a high elevation. It was, the stars are mind-blowing. So Amazing. It was just, and these owls would swoop in front of our faces, and they would blot out the stars for just a fraction of a second. And the owls are very quiet in flight, so no sound. It was really powerful. So the next morning, her name is Kristen. The next morning, Kristen and I were like, wow, that was great. That was so cool. Let's go camping again. And so 4 days later, I took her back to one night to a different part of the mountains. Now, this time it was much colder. And it snowed on us actually that night, but we had a tent. It didn't snow much. And we had a tent. And as the sun was setting, I said, let's hike up to that hill and warm up. So we walked up to this hill. Instead of going right into the tent where you'd be kind of chilled, so generate some heat, walk up a hill. So we walked to the top of this hill, get to the top of the hill, and one owl, two owl, three owls. Three owls flew around us for about the next half hour. And this is going to sound weird, but I am convinced it's the same three owls. We were in a different part of the mountains, same mountain range, the Tetons, but a different area. Probably, by the way, the crow flies probably no more than 3 or 4 miles away. But anyway, it was, to have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice was so mystical, so mystical. And I just, before they would kind of land off in the distance, this time these owls were like landing at our feet. I can just see Kristen's face. She had this look of astonishment that these owls were so close. Now, I did not talk about it then. Now I can't shut up about it, but I did not talk about it then. But I was looking at these real owls, and I heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And I was like, I mean, I kind of knew in the literature, I was reading UFO literature at the time, and I knew that there was owls occasionally get reported in context of these kinds of events. But that voice was so straightforward and so forthright that what happened was after that event, like both of us were a little freaked out. I think I was more freaked out than she was, but we
Can I ask you something?
Oh, yeah, please do.
That voice you heard, was it the same voice you heard when the aliens came?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's very tough for me because you know what it feels like? It feels like my voice. It feels like my voice, like a thought when like go back in the house and check, that you didn't leave the stove on. That kind of voice. It didn't feel like it was an outside source. So I have I've struggled with that exactly what you're asking. It felt like it was my voice. But it showed up both times, both nights. This has something to do with UFOs, and it was very palpable. So I was kind of nervous. Now, to be clear, like at that point in my life, 2006, the Owls with Kristen, I was not going there. Like I was not going to deal with my own stuff. I was like those memories in my youth. No way. I'm not going there, like didn't happen to me, but at the same time I could tell these stories. And then I was, isn't that interesting? I would not take that next step and sort of point to what they implied. I was reading accounts that sounded a whole lot like my own experiences, but I was in such a strong state of denial. So after the owls with Kristen, I did two things. I started looking into the mythology of owls, and then I also started looking into my own UFO experiences. I started
Mike,
reaching. Oh, yes.
before we go into the mythology and your own experiences, I did have Patrick, Patrick Noble, fellow North Carolinian. He wanted to know if you are aware of the Alaska Triangle or have any experiences with that.
I don't have spent a lot of time in Alaska, but I don't have any knowledge. Alaska is big. Like Alaska is like big. It's like a third of the size of the lower 48. So, but I have not. So.
Okay. So you're going into the mythology of owls and how it, and also into
Well, my own journey, yeah.
Yeah.
So I started collecting these kind of. So once I started talking to people, there's a researcher named Leo Sprinkle. He's since passed on, and he lived in Wyoming, and I was living in Idaho, which was close to Wyoming. So I reached out and contacted him, and he was very helpful, and he put me in touch with a few people, and I would talk to these people. And one of the questions I would ask is, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And right from the start of me looking into my own experiences, people would share their owl experiences, and they were so strange and so weird. And then you could tell that they were like, no one's ever asked me this before. So here's my story. Right. John Lamb is asking about, what if you believe it's an owl, but it's really only a screen memory? Yeah, I talk about that a lot in my books. And I believe there's a screen memory aspect, and I believe there's an aspect where real owls will show up at highly charged moments, and sometimes it's easy to figure out which is which, and sometimes it's not so easy. Yeah, owls equals aliens. Funny, owls and UFOs. Owl and UFO have the same number of letters. I cannot tell you how many times I've typed owl when I meant to type UFO, and the other way around too.
Right.
So I'm going to get one point which is so powerful. I started a blog, started sharing my owl stories, started sharing my my research. And so right from the very beginning, there was a place people could find me. I was asking for owl and UFO experiences. But on one of the very first blog posts I did on my blog in 2009, 3 years later, was the story I just told about Kristen. I reached out to Kristen after I published that story or posted on the blog, and I said, "Hey, what were we talking about that very first night when we saw the very first owls?" She had moved away from the valley at that point, but we still kept in touch. We're still good friends. I've talked to her just the other day. She got back to me right away and said, "Oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was giving my deepest, most heartfelt definition of what God means to me." So now I'm like I'm not at all churchy in that respect, but I do recognize the power of what she was saying and what. So the owls were showing up at the moment we were talking about the meaning of God.
Frequency and energy.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it shows up all the time in my accounts, mostly of owls, where people will be talking about God, or they'll be talking about higher physics, or they'll be talking about alternate realities, or they'll be talking about what happens after we die, and an owl will show up. It's very common. Okay, here. That's the foundation set of stories, and that was 2006. That's 20 years ago, almost 20 years, 18 years ago, and my life just flipped upside down since then.
You made a positive out of it, though. You've collected stories that have involved owls from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. And all types of owl stories. This is something that I feel is very important to share, because I feel like I was, for a while, I was very focused. I was only looking at owls and UFOs. And what I found was that it's not just that. So because I've been receiving all these letters, on a good day, I'll get 6 letters. On a normal day, I'll get maybe 1 or 2. That's been going on for over a decade. Do the math.
That's
I'm like, I got a lot of stories. Like it's in the thousands. So there's a kind of A+ story. You know, some people say, "Oh, I saw an owl on a fence post. It was really beautiful." I'm like, "Well, it's well and good," and then some people will tell stories that even now I feel like I'm made of pretty strong stuff, and I've heard a lot of stories. But wow, am I continually astounded by the stories I hear. But here's what's happened: owls and UFOs. People will see owls around the time of UFO contact. Sometimes it's a screen memory. Sometimes it would be a real owl. We can talk about screen memories. Oh, go ahead.
Explain a screen memory.
Okay, so I'll have to get back to these 5 things because this is important for me.
sorry.
So the screen memory, I went to a UFO conference one time and talked to a fellow, and then they had what's called a UFO abductee support group. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You sit in a circle and you talk about your UFO experiences. And I was in this room. I was very nervous. This was very early on in all this for me. And there was a guy in the back corner, very quiet, kind of nervous, understandably. And we'd been talking for a long time as a group. And then the moderator kind of said, "Well, let's end this. Anyone else have any questions?" This guy in the back raises his hand. And he said, Has anyone in this room ever had any odd experiences with owls? And I kid you not, everyone in the room raised their hand, including me. And he kind of jumped. He didn't expect that at all. And so he told the story, which has become very common in the reports that I receive. And he said, I was driving at night, and there was a big owl standing on the side of the road. And I pulled up alongside it, and I rolled down the window, and this owl was about 4.5 feet tall, 4 foot tall, 4.5 feet tall. And he looks at this owl, and he gets a really bad feeling, and he drives home. Now, later, he was taking pictures. He's a photographer. He was taking pictures of real owls in a nest, and he's looking at real owls, and he says, "I don't think that was an owl I saw that night." So he went to go to get hypnotized to find out what this owl was, and all that came out was the owl was wearing boots. Now, I've talked to other people who have gone through hypnosis. Talked to other people who've gone through hypnosis, and the owl on the side of the road, or that stops their car, and they have to pull right up to the owl, and they can't get around the owl, and they go through hypnosis, and the hypnotherapist will ask, "Can you describe this owl?" And they'll say, "Well, it's bald, and it's about 4 feet tall, and it's got big, huge black eyes, and it's got this skinny, shiny spacesuit on, and I don't think that's an owl." They describe what we would call the gray alien, but their memory, their conscious memory, is of seeing an owl. This is remarkably common, and there's a little more to it, but the implication is that these alien beings, and I'm very cautious, like I don't want to jump to any conclusions or make any assumptions, but these alien beings seem to be able to project, whether through technology or whether through psychic means, an image into the mind of the observer. So they are, instead of seeing a gray alien in the road at night, the witness sees an owl. And it's also very common that people will say, "Oh, I saw this owl in the road," and I'm like, "Okay, great. I'll talk to someone on the phone. Like, pull up. There's a Wikipedia pages where it has all the owls, and you can just go through North American owls. And there's not that many of them, especially not that many big ones. Really, only like 5. And they look at them and say, "Nope, it's none of these." I was like, "Well, those are the only ones we got. So if you didn't see that, you saw something else." So the implication is that these beings are doing this for some reason. Now, it's not just owls; it's deer is the other one. So owl and deer are at the top of the list, and then below that, there's all kinds of other things: squirrels and clowns and firemen and there's lots
Not
of
the clowns.
the clowns. Yeah, everyone's got a strong reaction to clowns. Yeah, so
That clown gonna get a pew pew, boy. I don't do clowns in the woods. I'm
yeah.
sorry, sir.
So,
But what are the 5?
Oh, here, go ahead and ask some questions because I'm taking you
The
off track
5
there.
characteristics.
Oh, the
I
five
got you.
characteristics. So like with so UFOs around the time, or owls seen around the time of UFO events, very common. Sometimes it's a real owl, like like there was an owl on a branch in a tree. I was looking at this owl. The owl flies off, and a flying saucer goes right over my head. Very common, very common. So, and the other would be owls and meditation. People meditating. I got a lot of stories where people meditate. Lots of people like to meditate outside. So they'll meditate outside and they'll close their eyes. And when they open their eyes, there's like an owl on a branch, like right in front of them. Owls and psychedelics. People taking mushrooms. I got other stories with other psychedelic drugs. And almost all of these are doing it for a ritual reason, not just sort of party on. I grew up in the 70s. There's like but for a very ritual setting, they'll see owls. Now,
yeah, I've
and
heard
sometimes it'll be a very trippy thing that's obviously a psychedelic vision of a 15-foot tall glowing owl that speaks to them telepathically, or people will be out sitting in a circle in the woods and an owl will land right in the middle of their circle. Owls and shamanic initiation. Owls at the time of someone being inducted into the role of shaman in their village. And that would be, let's say, an ancient tradition. A more modern tradition is you would work with a shaman. There's still plenty of shamans out there. And within the community of shamans, it's well understood that owls show up at the time of these events. And then the final one is owls and death. Owls will show up around the time of death. Now, the folklore is that owls will show up and precede a death. It's in stories, it's in Shakespeare, it's in children's stories that owls will show up before someone dies. Now, I have some of those accounts, but they are far outnumbered by owls showing up after someone dies, most often a parent. It's remarkable the number of stories I have where an owl, a child, they'll be an adult obviously, but their parent will die, they'll pass on. Here's one guy in the hospital, his dad dies of a massive heart attack, and he was a wonderful father to this young man, and he's at the hospital. There's all kinds of issues. He's late at night when he finally leaves the hospital. And the mechanical doors open up, and there's a sidewalk, and there's some grass next to the sidewalk. And on the grass is this owl, this little owl, looking up at him. And he walks up to the owl and goes, "Dad, I love you. You are a great father. Thank you so much for the role you played in my life."
Wow.
I have that story over and over and over.
Huh.
It is so consistent. Oh, go on.
I have a question about the ones that are seen on the roadside. Do any of them ever open their wings?
Yes, sometimes they fly away. Yeah, which I can't, like. I'm like, it's very murky to separate it, and so it's very. One person said the owl lifted up, flapped its wings, and he was in his car. Well, this is the story he told, and the wings were wide enough that he could see the wingtips out both sides of the car. Now this,
it's almost Mothman like.
Exactly. Yeah. It's almost like a dream memory. But the accounts is that if they do fly away, the wingspan is enormous. So whether this is a psychic projection into the mind or, I don't have a good answer to this. Yeah.
David Pardue, another one of my North Carolina buddies, he says an owl showed up the night my grandfather was dying at home. It stayed all night calling until he passed away, then it flew off.
Very common. Very common. I have a story where a woman go on.
Here's one interesting. I saved an owl sitting in the middle of the road one night. I had 4 hours of missing time. I took the owl home, and it lived in the tree beside my room. 6 months later, my mom passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh my word. Yeah. So now this is. He found the owl on the road and had missing time in that same night. That's a little unclear in that question there. I would love to talk to 4 hours of missing time. I would love to talk to this person. Tell him to get in touch with me, please.
Pat's putting your website and your all your information in the chat. But you were going into another story. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, man.
Oh, this is so normal. Like it started, and you start one story and you get sidetracked. And so back to those 5 modalities, these 5 things. What it told me is it's not that the owls are connected to UFOs. Like the owl is not connected to the UFO. The owl is connected to something that I'm calling highly charged human experiences, of which there are 5. There might be more. I just simply haven't. They haven't shown up as a pattern in my research.
The car ride home that should have took 45 minutes took me 4 hours. I don't know how I floated into my driveway.
Okay. And
That's
this is
similar to,
very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
We'll definitely hook you guys up.
Great. And
he knows blood, so we talked about him earlier.
Oh, good. I know Chris well. Yeah. So these 5 events are I call these highly charged human experiences. So the owl is not connected to the UFO necessarily. It is connected to the highly charged human experience. I would say that all of these experiences, UFOs, meditation, shamanic initiation, psychedelics, and death, all of those could be considered like a mystical event in some way. And that tells me a lot. So the owl is connected to these mystical human experiences. And they show up at other times too, points of transition in someone's life too. And death would be the ultimate transition. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, they did a follow-up. Said 40 years later, a Bigfoot from a childhood encounter gifted me a white owl feather inside my locked car, and the owl I saved had 1 white feather. Incredible.
Wow. Okay. So this is...
It was the first time back in the woods since I was 8. I'm 40 now is the next thing. I'm going to be, when people are allowed to tell their stories, this is, as a researcher, and you may catch this too sometimes. I'm obviously looking into these, right? So UFO experiences and these kind of experiences, a big, long, wide continuum. There's all kinds of things from government conspiracies to kind of people becoming psychics and channeling aliens and stuff like this. All kinds of stuff in this continuum. I'm just looking at this little thin sliver of UFOs and owls. And that's the thread I'm pulling on. And what I'm finding is that there's a richness and power to these stories. So I feel really blessed because these are exactly the kind of stories I loved when I was a kid, these kind of campfire stories. And what I'm finding is that these stories have there's any number of ways I could say it, mythic quality. There's a term that I've heard called mythopoetic. And there's that sums it up perfectly. It's got a poetic, mythic quality to the accounts. And that fellow who had the missing time and the 1 white feather, this is exactly what I'm finding is that, oh, there we go. I was also abducted when I was 16 and put in a womb room. That I've met people back here on Earth in real life from the mothership I was on.
And that's something else that I've heard many times is that people recognize someone that like basically you're the person I met on a ship, and I'm like I have lots of those stories. Yeah.
But doesn't it feel good to be able to say it even in chat without being ridiculed? You
know what? People contact me all the time with their owl stories, and they say, this story is crazy. I can't believe this story. This is it's the craziest thing ever. And I'm like, not unless you're me and you hear these stories 6 times a day. So what I can say, like 95% of what people need to hear, they're reaching out to me for help. I'm not a clinical therapist. I can't really offer help that way. I can listen. And what I can do, honestly, is I can say, oh, you're not alone. I got that story so many times in my files. And what my very strong sense is that these stories, like our ancient ancestors would step out of the cave after their father died, and they would find an owl. They would see an owl, or they would have a powerful mystical experience in the forest, and with an owl, and and they could talk to the village shaman, and there was a tradition that everyone understood. We don't live in that world anymore. We are divorced of those traditions. But the events are still happening. I'm not a shaman. I don't pretend to be, but people are coming to me and asking for. Sometimes they're basically saying they want me to hear their stories, which I'm happy to do. And I also have to say that I'm getting so many stories, I simply cannot keep up with them. And I can't answer thoughtfully to the stories that, that's my YouTube page. Yeah. There's also, I have a homepage. I have a homepage, which is just MikeClelland.com. You can see how my name is spelled there. Just MikeClelland.com. It'll take you right there with no spaces.
Send a description.
So, okay.
Now
keep going.
we're going through the mythology of owls because that's something big. It is a Bigfooter show, but it's something Bigfooters can relate to. The mythology goes back so far, but in the Bigfoot world, high strangeness seems to go around, whether it's related or not. It's happening on the same land, and we don't know if it's related or not. But I keep an open mind because I hear both sides of the spectrum, so to speak. But so we're having Bigfoot activity, then we're having high strangeness, and we all agree it goes with frequency and energy. And so let's go. You also have people in the community that have lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you talk about, I forget what it was called, the screening effect.
Screen memory.
Makes you wonder what's going on. But can we just kind of go through the owls, what they meant? That's what we're working up to. I get so excited about the subject.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough because you start one place and a conversation naturally leads wherever it's going to go. So the ancient mythology of the owl. This is the best I can do. And I've talked to some mythologists and some researchers, and they're, I got to make sure I'm not talking out of my hat here, but the world's mythologies, they're all a little different, but if there's a consistent thread, is that the owl can fly through the forest in complete darkness. In ancient man, that would have been magic. Modern man can say, owls have highly evolved eyes, that they can take in the available light, and they can see clearly through the evolutionary process. Ancient man would have said, it's magic. The owl can fly through the forest in complete darkness. That became a metaphor. Now, the forest means something to us. It's much different. It's only been a few generations since the invention of the electric light bulb. The forest at night was a place of testing, a place of challenges, a place of rich with lore. So the owl would fly into the forest, that mythic forest, go to the land of the gods, go to the land of the ancestors, go to the land of the dead, go to that other realm. And then the next step, the next mythic step that's consistent is the owl would return with a message. And that is how I got the book The Messengers. People would tell me these owl stories, and they would say, oh, wow, this owl landed on my back porch, and it was right at the time of some powerful event. And then they would say, and then the messenger on my back porch. They would just call this thing a messenger it was right there in the letters. It's so consistent. So it made itself very plain to me that people were seeing these as messengers. And so that's the ancient lore. Oh, and then goddess Athena, which is the goddess of wisdom, had an owl oftentimes on her wrist. It was a little owl. She had a companion owl. And so that's 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece, they had the owl as the totem of the goddess of wisdom. It's also the goddess of arts and crafts, and she was also the goddess of war and commerce and things like that. So, but wisdom, that's why, so that turn the clock forward, when little kids graduate from kindergarten, you have little owls put thumbtack to their wall. That's why it's associated with wisdom. Now, that's the ancient lore. Present day, Harry Potter has a pet owl that delivers the mail. It is perfect. It is the owl as messenger. This isn't some dusty book in a library somewhere. This is the most popular series of books ever in the history of publication. Has an owl as messenger. It's perfect. Now, J.K. Rowling has OWL right in her name. That doesn't mean anything, but that's how my mind works. So the lore is rich. Now the lore is different, right? So like a Native American in Utah is going to have a different lineage than the Irish farmer in County Kerry. So there's the stories are going to, but that thread is consistent, that the owl is a messenger from the beyond. Now the eagle has a similar vibe, but it doesn't fly in the forest at night. It flies in the bright daylight. So it has a completely different set of. So the implication is that the eagle is a messenger of strength and ego and emotion, like normal human day-to-day stuff. The owl is completely different. It is the deepest part of the psyche. It is the shadow world. It is the land of the dead. Yeah.
The mystery.
Yeah, the
It's a
mystery.
mystery.
Perfect.
And I think that's why we have I have a tendency to fear what I don't understand. We were talking before, we started about 3 events. I told you, trust me, we're not going to go in here but I told you 3 events in my life, and I was telling you something bad happened after each one of those events. But the more we talked, the way I looked at it was wrong. There was a get ready, or keep your head on a swivel, watch your surroundings. And it was because I knew early on that they were messengers, that I was very in tune to my surroundings, that potentially kept me safe. So that's the way I look at it.
I spoke with a woman, and she had been having UFO contact experiences, and she was living in near the ocean, and she was going to support groups and stuff like that. She was terrified. She was having a lot of trouble with these experiences, like just to try to come to terms with it. And she would walk her dog. So there was a day it was pouring down rain, and the dog wanted to go for a walk. So she walked the dog, and she would walk out on a jetty. There was a jetty, a big rock jetty that went way out into the saltwater. So she would walk along this jetty with her dog, and she's about halfway out there, and she goes, "What am I doing? Why am I out here in the rain? I would never walk the dog in the rain." So she says, I'm going back home. So she turns around, and there's a big owl standing in her path. And she said, my dog, big German Shepherd, is normally super high strung, would bark and chase a big thing like that. The dog sat as if it was facing royalty. So she had this total mystical experience of facing this owl, and the owl flew off. And it was shortly around that time when she had a pain in her arm, and she went to the doctor. It was just after this event on the jetty, seeing this owl. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and she went through traditional chemotherapy, and she said it was brutal. It was brutal. It took me right to death's door. Like, she felt like she was right on the edge of dying. And she slowly recovered. And when I talked to her, she said she had been, I can't remember the number now, she'd been cancer-free for over a decade. And I just talked to her recently. And so that's another,
That is incredible.
getting on 50. So
Goes
I
back
asked,
to the spiritual. I'm
So-
sorry, go ahead.
so I asked her, what, like, I almost said, did the owl like cure the cancer? And she said, no, it was nothing like that. The owl was there telling me my life was about to change. And I said, well, what's your life like now? She said, before this event, I was afraid of my own shadow. And now I am afraid of nothing.
Wow, that's powerful.
So when I think I asked you, I said, like, you And you said it yourself just now. Like, I asked this question, like, okay, what happened? What's going on? Because oftentimes people will say, like, the owl preceded, like, the passing of my parent. And then you'll hear the story, and you'll hear that before the parent died, they made amends with their children. They had a wonderful reunion with their family. And so the death itself could be looked at as a moment of transformation in that person's final hours. So I'm looking, obviously, now let me also say this. I didn't want to write I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say benevolent. I don't want to say optimistic. I don't want to say good, like reflecting, like these stories, some of them are really dark and really scary, but the majority of them seem to be hopeful. And that's the best word I can come up with, hopeful. Like, there's a hopeful quality to these owl stories. And of all those, so what I can say is that woman who had the diagnosis of cancer after seeing the owl and then surviving, I see the owl as the totem of a deep challenge. Now, a challenge can be hard work, but it doesn't make it bad. Right? So you can be confronted with a challenge. You can be forced to do hard work that you probably wouldn't want to do. But in doing so, you should be proud of overcoming a challenge. And I almost look at my own life with this owl stuff. I had to research it. I had to make sense of it. I had to kind of collate it into a book. That book, I wasn't a writer when I started that book, but wow, was that a challenge to put that massive amount of information. There's hundreds of stories in that Blue Messengers book, the first one I wrote. So, And I wish I had a good answer, but what I can say is that there's something hopeful woven into these stories. Not all of them, but it seems to be the vast majority have something hopeful written into them. And sometimes it's, for instance, people who have a owl and UFO experience will often have a spiritual awakening. It's right there. I gave a slideshow. I talked at a conference, and I had one slideshow, a big black background, big white letters, spiritual awakening. I hit the button and it says, people have a spiritual awakening after an owl and UFO experience. And I was like, can I get away with saying that? And the PowerPoint presentation, it's in my laptop. And I was like, all I got to do is open this laptop and just push delete on that one slide and I get rid of it. And I was going to do that before the presentation because I was like, kind of just didn't trust it. And this guy comes up to me and says, Mike, I'm really looking forward to your talk. I had this owl experience and I saw this UFO and, I had a spiritual awakening because of it. Huh. It was like in the moment when I'm saying I'm feeling these doubts and I'm going to delete this bit of information. That happened.
So let's look at both sides of the coin. If you will, give me a really good story of a spiritual awakening. I think the one about the lady with the cancer is one, but we'll go, if you can throw another one out there, that would be great. But then again, give the really dark side and the dark story that involves them, because I think it's fair to look at both sides. Can you do that for us?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Okay, let me the spiritual awakening story. So this is going to go on a little bit, but this is the kind of stories that I'm getting. Woman contacts me. She's pulling into her driveway. She's talking on the phone. And she thought it was a little kid in her driveway, but it was an owl, and it flies up into a branch. So she gets out of her car, she hangs up the phone, she calls her son out and said, there's this owl in the come on, you got to see this thing. And so the boy comes out, and the owl flies off the branch, touches the top of her head. And her son is like, Mom, are you okay? And she's like, oh, it was so gentle. It was so gentle. So around that time, she goes to a baseball game. Her son plays Little League baseball. And she's sitting with the other parents, and she's kind of someone from the neighborhood she's acquainted with, but no, not a real friend or anything. And she gets talking. It's like, how you doing? And the woman says, not good. I need a kidney or I'm going to die. And the lady says, I'll give you mine. And the lady, so they have this conversation. It's not that easy. Like we have to be compatible. You have to see a doctor. You have to go through a series of tests. said, I'll go to a doctor. I'll take those series of tests. So she does that. She goes to a doctor. She goes to a series of tests. And the doctor gets back to her and says, okay, you're compatible. With that person, is that your sister? And she goes, no, it's not my sister. And it's like, I was going to ask, is that your twin sister? You are so perfectly aligned for the compatibility. So she goes through she gives her kidney away. Both people are doing great. Both their health is great. This woman at the same time saw a UFO right around the same time. I could tell that story too, but she saw a UFO in the nighttime sky. This is a weird detail. This is something I've heard only a few times. She's standing in the parking lot of this little hiking trail. The sun has gone down. They're looking up at the sky. This structured craft floats right over the parking lot. She said everything turned red. The sky turned red. The trees turned red. The parking lot turned red. The cars in the parking lot everything turned red. And then it went away, and then everything kind of came back to normal. So this is all happening at the same time. I said, here's the question I asked. What were you talking about? Like, what the questions I asked is what was happening leading up to the event, what changed after. So leading up to the event, I said, who are you talking to on the phone when you pulled in the driveway and you saw that owl? She said, I was talking about my dad. I said, what were you talking about? I said, well, that was right when I was making the decision. I said, I have decided I am going to give my kidney away to this stranger in the neighborhood. And that's when the owl touched her head. So I cannot, there's a lot going on in that story, and I cannot be anything but in awe of the power of that story. Spiritual awakening is a funny word. I mean, wow, I don't know if I could give a kidney away to a complete stranger after a conversation on a Little League, at the Little League game. But so that to me is a very beautiful, touching story about a spiritual, it's not quite a spiritual awakening, but it's the kind of story that I'm getting. Oh, your mic's not on.
It's because I have a lot going on in the background. That's a very beautiful story, but the flash of the orange is similar to what you experienced.
Exactly. Yeah. But nothing, the neighborhood didn't turn orange. The sidewalk didn't turn orange when it was only like a second. It sounded like it lasted longer. She actually had pictures of it. The pictures don't look like much. She took pictures of the parking lot. It looks like the parking lot is made of like red licorice or something like that. So, I mean, it's it's hard to tell. I mean, you could easily just take a photo. Like, to be fair, you could just take a photograph and anyone could just push that little slider on your color scheme thing and make the parking lot look red just through simple means. But now for a scary story or a bad story, I have one guy sent me this long series of accounts where he would hear an owl. He had like 8 of them. He would hear an owl, and then within 3 or 4 days, a loved one would die. And this had been going on all his life. That's the lore that shows up in Shakespeare and stuff like that. Right before Macbeth is there's a character in Macbeth right before they're killed. There's the nightbird shrieks. There's like someone off stage does a hooting of an owl sound effect when you're in the theater seeing the play.
Huh.
Well, that's pretty incredible. That first story, I'm just still in kind of awe like that.
I got hundreds of those stories. Hundreds. I don't know what to do with them.
Do you ever get anything where owls correspond with a Bigfoot encounter? Have you ever gotten anything like that?
I have had Bigfoot encounters where people will have powerful owl, not hand in hand. Like, there might be out there. I'd love to hear them, but around the same time, a woman that was going to there's a team of researchers. One of them, his name's Timothy Renner. He does a lot of Bigfoot research. He does a show called Strange Familiars, and he's written books with Joshua Cutchin about Bigfoot encounters. And he did a wonderful book called Where the Footprints End. It's a big, fat, 2-volume book. So he went to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota specifically to talk to people about their Bigfoot experiences. So I think it was 3 people, meet at the airport. They get in the rent-a-car and they drive to the Pine Ridge Reservation, and there were owls flying across the road as they were going there to research Bigfoot. They had a very strange experience with like kind of a someone with a backpack who had a big beard and a lot of hair, and he sort of played the role of Bigfoot in a way where they interacted with him just briefly, and he walked off into the woods and disappeared, and it didn't make any sense that he should have been there at that moment, at that time. So that's not a Bigfoot experience, but they kind of said he was our stand-in for our Bigfoot experience when we were on the reservation.
So out of all of this topic, what do you love to get out there the most? Because to me, you are the expert in the room, and you have dealt with so many people and so many stories, and just hearing stories can be a healing experience. Just like when had their comments up about what they went through, just saying it to someone that doesn't dismiss or ridicule you can be a very healing experience. What do you want to get out there? And then we'll see if we have any questions.
I want to I don't care if people believe that owls are associated with UFOs. I don't really care if people believe in the sort of mystical aspects of these stories or the paranormal aspect or whatever vocabulary word you want to use. But what I want to impart is that there is a deeper reality that seems to be running parallel to our own reality. There's a deeper form of reality that we can be oblivious months, years at a time. We'll have no evidence of it. But every once in a while, I think this happens in everyone's life, there'll be a coincidence, there'll be a synchronicity, there'll be just that moment of magic. And that I want people to recognize that these events take place. And my second book, the subtitle says Accounts of Owls, UFOs, and a Deeper Reality. It's the deeper reality that is the common thread. And that's what I want people to, if I can open the eyes of people or make them more comfortable knowing that there's, for me, I've like crossed the line. Like to me, I know there's some form of reality that is interacting with our reality. And so that's what I want people to go, the takeaway point.
Well, going back to meditation, when you're meditating, you're literally opening your mind, and you're going to be more prone to accepting what you normally wouldn't if you're in that state. That's just my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. So with psychedelics, you take a psychedelic trip. You take ayahuasca in the jungles of Peru. Boy, you're opening yourself up, and also the role of the shaman. That's the role of the shaman, is to ritually open themselves up to the needs of the village, to be the spiritual helper in the village. Yeah.
Don, I know you've been listening a while and you've been really polite. Do you have any questions or anything you want on the?
No, I get a kick out of the owls though, because that's all I record up here. But it's the Bigfoot doing them. Oh, and I've had them doing them. And while I'm outside, they're out there doing the owl vocals. And I've seen two owls, barred owls, come flying in right into the woods where they are. And then seconds later, those owls were going two different directions through the branches, and they got out of there. But it wasn't what the owls expected once they got over there.
So owls are pretty simple animals. You can just play a recording of a hooting owl, and then it'll attract other owls. So, but I've heard that many times that the Sasquatch or Bigfoot will mimic the owl.
Oh yeah.
But I should be really careful. I feel like I've forgotten more owl stories than most people have ever heard in their life. So, I'm in my files somewhere. I'm certain I must have had an owl and Bigfoot together story. So that's yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that's I found funny is I was in the woods one day in the middle of winter. I was sitting out in the woods, and a barred owl flew in, landed in a tree near me, but I could only see its head, and it was looking right at me. And I went, "Oh my God, that looks like a Bigfoot face."
It looks like a gray alien too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the black eyes, and that's what
Well, the
I've seen
eyes
up
are,
there.
and the owl's eyes are fixated, right? They don't
They did.
move. They have,
We have round
You're,
eyeballs that we can move in our head, right? So I wrote a chapter on the
yeah,
physiology of owls. I can look straight ahead and then move my eyeballs, but an owl can't do that. And the reason is because their eyeball is shaped more like a cone or a tube. It's more like a tube, and that's to allow a deeper a deeper. Oh, the fourth kind. I'll talk about the fourth kind in a second. To allow allow the owl to take in more light in a minimal light environment. Yeah.
no.
And that's why the owls, consequently, since they can't move their eyes, they have this very eerie head motion. That is unlike most birds are kind of twitchy and nervous and they twitch, and owls do not do that. Owls have an incredibly, almost robotic, strange quality to the way they move, and that's because they hunt in flight, and in flight they're carefully moving their head to scan the ground for mice.
Yeah, I've seen one sitting in a tree hunting, and then all of a sudden I was watching it. It looked straight up and stretched out, probably another few inches. And I couldn't figure out what the heck it was doing. And then a bald eagle went overhead. So,
Yeah.
he was maybe camouflaging himself or something, maybe trying to look like a dead branch. I don't know. But he stretched himself out, but he was looking straight up.
So owls, the speckly pattern on owls
Yeah.
is to camouflage them against trees and stuff like that. So owls will often stay very still, and you can often get very close to them because they won't move because they are assuming they're camouflaged in the forest.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you think these the owls were gifted this thing they have, or is it just something naturally they can do, this gift they have?
Well, the gift of flying in.
Well, showing
there's
up
a
in
multiple
places, showing up before, death
Oh,
or after.
you're asking the ultimate question that I've struggled with. Like, wow, I've danced around that question.
If
So
they
they're
would
not just
know-
showing up for UFOs. They're showing up for these other highly charged things too. But the question is why? My answer would be is that the owl is an archetype. And an archetype is one of those words that like a philosophy student would wrestle with with the other philosophy students in their dorm room. But so an archetype would be that within our shared collective memory, we have these like a shared knowing of certain core principles in what it means to be human. For instance, when you go to see Star Wars and Luke Skywalker is the star of the movie, you're seeing an adventure movie with lightsaber fights and explosions and stuff like that. But what you're at a deeper level, you're seeing the archetypal story of the hero.
Right.
You're tapping into that, seeing this simple adventure story, but beneath that is a more complex, ancient story. And I would argue that when you see the owl, you're seeing a bird with big eyes, but you're also tapping into a archetypal deep knowing that we all share. And if
that would explain why it shows up in these psychedelic trips. It's already in there,
It's already in our psyche. Exactly. And so when we see an owl at the time of a UFO contact experience, let's say, or we see an owl at the time of a UFO sighting, we somehow in the back of our mind equate that with this grand human story. I can't give a good answer, but I think you know where I'm going.
Right. No, I understand. Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's go into the fourth kind.
The Fourth Kind is a movie that came out in 2009, I think, and it's very interesting. I guess it was the publicity hype. It's not an A+ movie. It's kind of a B movie, but it's pretty good. It's scary.
Yes.
It's spooky, and the producers said this is a true story, based on a true story, and they even have footage in the story that's supposedly people under real hypnosis, and they cross-cut that with the modern actor playing the character. That's all fake. They made that up. But I'm all for the, Barnum and Bailey kind of promotional stunts like that. But the owl features prominently as a screen memory throughout that movie. It is creepy. It's super creepy. They really did a good job at like pumping up the creepy quality. My strong sense is that the scriptwriters were probably had a bunch of UFO books around. It's in those UFO books. Like I didn't discover the owl and UFO thing. It's in a lot of books that preceded my story by 30 years. But it was just a mention here or a mention there. Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, is the very first point that I found. And believe me, I've searched the literature. That's the very first point I have found. There might be something else. I simply haven't found it. Where in a nonfiction story, owls are directly associated with UFO contact. He tells the story, wow, it's almost Christmas time right now. In 2005, in 1985, that's the night of Christmas Day, 1985. So what is that, almost 40 years ago, by only a few days, he had a memory of, he woke up in the morning and had what we would now call the UFO abduction memory. He felt like he was on board a craft. He felt like there were medical exams. He felt like there were these bald beings, these skinny beings, and in this strange environment. But when his wife woke him up, what he said was, he didn't talk about that. He said, there was an owl at the window last night.
Huh.
And they went to the window, and this was in upstate New York, and there was snow, fresh snow on the windowsill, and there was no markings on the snow on the windowsill. So there could not have been an owl standing on the windowsill because it would have left tracks in the snow. So he said the lack of tracks, not seeing the owl's footprints in the snow, left him shaken. He's a beautiful poetic writer, and he wrote very beautifully about that, the cold night outside, and the so he realized right away that it was impossible that he saw an owl because it should have left tracks in the snow on the windowsill.
Do you know if the
hold on, let me just finish up. So no, forgive me, I get on a roll like this, but
okay.
So my strong sense is that the scriptwriters for the Fourth Kind had read Whitley Strieber's Communion. It was an incredibly popular book, and they recognized the mythic power of the owl in a story and just put it into the story. I've never talked to these. I'm just making an assumption, but I bet you it played out like that.
Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
Going back to your childhood, when you seen the Grays, was it snowing outside? Because I was going to ask you about tracks. It seems like
what? I that next morning I woke up. I drew a picture of it, but I just dismissed it outright as a dream, and I never went out to see if there were tracks in the snow. I mean that's 30 years ago now. But I regret not doing that, but I can't turn the clock back. Yeah.
I appreciate that honesty. A Little Twisted said, owls are often regarded as messengers from the spiritual world. Their presence can serve as a powerful sign, yes it can, and that you are being guided or watched over. In many spiritual traditions, seeing, I guess he's still typing it, seeing an owl is a reminder to pay attention to your inner wisdom. Little Twisted, you're smart.
Well, that's consistent all over the world, and your inner wisdom is different than I use the eagle as a different totem, and that would be more your outer wisdom, like the pragmatic wisdom of your day-to-day life would be in the eagle, and the owl would represent that inner shadow wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my birth. It's my birth animal. It's September. Something about September. The owl represents September.
Oh,
but
yeah,
I did have a
coming darkness. Yeah, I mean that coming yeah.
Oh, right.
I mean it's autumn. Autumn. Yeah, the days are getting shorter.
Quick question: do you know if the owl screen memory is the most common?
It's owl and deer. It's hard to know. Like I don't think there's a good database where you could really. But I've talked to plenty of people who've done decades of hypnotherapy with people who have had UFO contact events or have studied, and it's roughly deer and owls are at the top of the list by far. They overwhelm the top of the list, and then below that are a bunch of other things. And the deer also has a rich mythic lore. It's an archetypal totem in its own right.
Well, this is TKB. You're going to have to report back to us, buddy, on this one. A little twisted. He's talking to another member. It's a trip because 5 minutes ago, an owl scared me outside, and I come in to hear this. I'd say that was kind of.
So I live in a place with
Buttercup.
Yeah, I live in a place with a lot of owls. I hear them every night, or pretty much every night. So, but that's not a mystery. There's no mystery there. The neighbors are hearing them and seeing them too.
So let's get into time loss. What can you tell us? What is a common occurrence that between the stories you get about owls, UFOs, time loss, what is something that we don't hear in the details that most people outside of the spectrum would not be familiar with? What's that one thing that we would not think would be in the details? Is that a gotcha question? I'm sorry.
So here's a weird one. So like do you know what Reiki therapy is?
Reiki?
Reiki, it's called Reiki.
With the rocks.
Sometimes there's with the rocks, but it's a Japanese form of
healing energy.
Healing. And it's often you don't touch the patient. It's hands off. Mm-hmm. You can just put your hands over the patient. Someone can show up at the Reiki therapist and say, I have a sore back, and they can put your hands over the patient, and they can alleviate the back pain. There's been scientific research done on it. It's a understood, recognized form of therapy. So I'm getting not the big cross section of the UFO population. The people who are reaching out to me have had owls in their stories. So the people with owls and UFO experiences come to me, they tell me their story, and I often talk to them on the phone, or I'll talk to them over email, and in the corner of the page, I'll just write down Reiki, and I'll just wait. And at some point they'll say, oh, I just got my Reiki 3 level certification, and I'm now a Reiki master, and I can do Reiki therapy. I don't have the good numbers, right? So I would love to have some help and to really crunch these numbers. Anecdotally, I'm going to say it's 50% of the people who have had owl and UFO experiences, 50% of those people are Reiki healers. Or if they're not doing Reiki therapy, they're doing another form of energetic healing. Now, for instance, that lady that I told you about a little bit ago that gave her kidney away, I didn't have to ask her if she does Reiki therapy. Like, wow, there's no more selfless healing that a human can do than to give up a kidney. So, I mean, people are healers. Let's take it half a step back. And so the umbrella statement would be they're doing healing work, and that is overwhelming in my work, that the people who have had these experiences are working as healers. Or if they're not working as healers, like early on I said I had a bunch of stories of deer hunters in their deer stands that had powerful owl experiences. This one guy, Don, he had the mother of all owl experiences. A beautiful story. It's in my second book. He I asked him, I had to ask, okay, one of the questions, what kind of, are you doing healing work? He's like, no, I don't do healing work. What are you talking about? So, well, put your hands on someone and you heal them. And this is not an airy-fairy guy from Sedona. This is like a hunter in Missouri. And he said, well, my wife was going through chemotherapy, and I could put my hands, I could produce a form of heat with my hands and alleviate the pain and symptoms of chemotherapy. I was like, okay, that check. He gets checked off on that list as far as being a healer, given that kind of answer. So that is what is showing up. I want to say, I'm very cautious using the term mystical, but mystical healers. That is a consistent thread.
That's interesting.
Those are the people that have a knowledge outside of Western medicine, though. Those are the people that are, I think it was in Japan where they healed cancer just by hitting a note over a patient. You could see the tumor shrinking. It was like a hum, and that once again that goes with frequency and energy. So it's kind of people that leave themselves open. I could be wrong because I'm just a country girl from Robinson County, North Carolina, sir. But it's when you're in that state, you have put your mind open to the possibilities that just lie within us as people that we have forgotten. It's almost like we go back to a primal, or I can't finish because I forgot what I was saying.
I know. Just that that's the same thing that's happening with the owl stories. It traces back to something that is a core part of what it means to be human, is to have this archetypal knowing that the owl represents this. It reflects the deeper reality that is around us at all times. That's a very simple way of saying it. Yeah, I agree completely.
So it has the healing aspect to it too, but it also has a dark aspect to it. But we talked about that in the before the show, that I was viewing it, and I can be a Debbie Downer, but I was viewing it in the wrong manner. So sometimes it's how you look at it and not what. Yeah, Lavani is actually someone you would probably enjoy talking to. She has dreams of owls, and I think she said, were they 4 or 6 feet owl? But she meditates. She's really into energy and frequency. She is really in tune to Mother Earth, and D Mitchell. I love him. D, if you will, email me because I'd like to talk to you about something. But he says, yes, intent is super important.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. So we've touched on a little everything, but we have just skimmed the surface of what you have to offer. Let's go into I don't think the time loss is just fascinates me. The time loss, some people don't even realize they've had it.
Oh yeah, very common. Unless you have a clock, there might be no way to know. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there's also other anomalies with time. There's like gained time, which is another thing that shows up with people who've had these experiences, where people will drive they'll do a long drive, and they'll say like, okay, I've got my 6-hour drive. I'm just about to start it. And then they pull into the driveway and get home, and their wife runs out to the driveway and like, what are you doing? You said you wouldn't be home for 6 hours. Like, it's like, that was only 2 hours ago. And so like they made the 6-hour drive in 2 hours. So there's other weird flip flops that can take place too. There's one story of a guy who was sitting on his couch, and he's watching TV, and he gets up and he goes to the kitchen and he gets a can of soda out of the fridge, and he opens it up, right, and goes, and it makes that noise. And then he comes back and he sits down on the couch. And then he's sitting on the couch and he's like, oh, here it's happening. I'm going to have this abduction experience. He could feel the sensations. And then he's taken out of his body and has this out-of-body abduction experience where he's taken on board the craft in an etheric realm. And he's there on the craft, and he goes through all these kind of, like almost like a teaching type of environment. And then whoosh, he's put back into his body. And so he's sitting there on the couch. He's been gone, it feels like, for hours. And then he's sitting there and he hears this in the kitchen. And then he sees himself walk out of the kitchen with a can of soda and like sits back down into his own body. So there's these stories. Does that make it like, it's like, wow, that's a real head twister to try to make sense of what happened there. But these are the kinds of stories that anyone who has done this research has heard these stories. And what bothers me is that all people want to talk about is the tic tacs that the Navy pilots see from an aircraft carrier, from the jet plane that they took off from the aircraft carrier, and then they see these little, like a dot. I want to talk to these pilots and ask if they've had psychic experience or a spiritual awakening, or if they've seen owls. So these are or if they're healing. Are they doing healing? They may say no, but I would love to ask.
Out of body experiences. What? Let's go into that. What can you throw at us on that would educate us or kind of open our eyes up a little bit on that?
So, How would? Okay, how deep do you want to go here? So
Bring it on. You got a room
okay,
full
so
of
to tell
people
this, like, okay, so I had an experience in 2013 where I was camped on the side of the road. I was driving, and it was a, and it's doing all this outdoor work. I sometimes out west is different than the East Coast. In the West, there's big open spaces, and you can just pull off the side of the road and sleep on the side of the road. It's kind of understood. So I had this. I was driving through southern Utah, and it got late, and I was had a long drive ahead of me, and I just camped on the side of the road. I had just been to a UFO conference, which is interesting, and so I slept on the side of the road, and I woke up. This was in if you can look at a map, it's between Beaver, Utah, and Cedar City, I think and about halfway between each of them. It's funny, it's right on the line of the counties. I called both police departments trying to figure out if anyone reported anything that night. But I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this big round structure on a hill. And I looked up at this thing. This is a very, very, very quiet, lonely road. And I said, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I looked at it and looked at it. It looked like it looked like a water tank, honestly. It looked like a big water tank, huge water tank, but it had a ring of lights around it, like a low water tank. So it wasn't like flying saucer, like the classic Hollywood one that you would see with that tapers off. But it wasn't flying. It was just parked there. I was like, well, I didn't notice that when I went to like lay down here. Well, that's weird. And so I looked at it and looked at it and looked at it and rolled over and went to sleep. And then I woke up later, and a coyote was howling near my head, which is, in the retrospect, this is such a vital part of the story. Here's a mythic animal, southern Utah, the coyote, and the landscape of the natives who call that area the traditional home. The coyote would be the mythic trickster. So loud, like right near my head. Like there was no coyote to see. I sat up and looked around trying to see this coyote. It felt like I could have reached out and fed it a dog biscuit. There was nothing.
Wow.
There was nothing there. It could have been behind a bush or behind my car or something like that, but this was a weird experience. So, and I've camped out, let me tell you, I've camped out thousands of nights, and I've heard a lot of coyotes, but never one that close. Later on in the night, there's a bright light behind this bush. And I sat up and I was like, what is that light? Could that be a car? Could someone, certainly could have been someone doing exactly what I did, just pulling into this turnoff on the side of the road. But in the next morning, I got up and walked around. It was still dark when I got up and when I started driving. This is funny. This was the night of the time change, right? So this would have been in March 10th, 2013. So that's the spring time change for daylight savings time. And so I was looking at my clock in the car, and the people on the radio were saying, "Oh, it's 5 o'clock," and my clock only said it was 4 o'clock, and I was like, "Holy crap! What happened? What happened?" Then I realized that was. But anyway, so that same night, I had these experiences. I knew something happened that night. I just knew it. To tell this story properly, there's so many other events that tie into it, but I eventually went through hypnotherapy, and now let me back up a little bit. Like, I don't fully trust the memory that emerged through hypnosis, right? Hypnosis is a funny thing. It's a great story, but I don't know what to trust. So in the story, I wanted to look at this night because there's no associated fear with the night. The night was lovely. It was a beautiful night. It was stars and the coyote and it was a great night. There was no fear associated with it at all. So the hypnotherapist, her name is Yvonne Smith. This would have been in 2018. Takes me through the induction. You walk down these stairs, and then she says, "And where are you?" And I'm like, we decided I was going to look into this night. So let me add one more thing. Before the hypnosis, I said to her, when I'm in that hypnotic state, which nobody really understands what hypnosis is. There's no good working definition for what hypnosis is. When I'm in this state, ask me what's up with the owls. I'm curious what answer I'll give. She's like, great, no problem. So we go through this thing. So I'm lying there in the sand, I got a big thick sleeping pad. I got a big thick winter sleeping bag. I got a big pillow. It's great. It's beautiful. And she says, where are you? And so I'm like, right by my car. I'm looking up. There's this big round structure on the hill there. And there's my car's right here. And it's pretty and it's cold and it's calm and it's really nice. And she asked a few more questions. And then all of a sudden, this is really eerie when you hear me on the transcription. She recorded it and then I transcribed it, but you can hear me go, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. So I'm like, and I start telling this story. I don't know where this story came from. It just, it just emerged. I was saying things and it was surprising me. These words were coming out of my mouth. So she said, well, what's happening? And so I'm like, there's this bright light behind the bush and it's them. And I know it's them and they're here for me. And then the next thing I say is, I'm floating above this big round structure. I can see it. It's the big thing. It's in the shadows. It looks black. It's got a ring of lights around it. I'm right above it. I'm looking down at it. And I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And the hypnotherapist says, Mike, are you out of body? And I say, I don't know, but I'm looking down at this, but I'm pretty sure I'm still in the sleeping bag. So I'm looking down at this big structure. Now here's where I don't trust the memory. All of a sudden I'm like, I go right from looking down at this thing to walking down a hallway. And I've told this story many times, but I'm walking down the hallway. It feels like the hallway is this curved, sort of science fiction-y looking hallway, as if there was a round hallway that went right around the inside of a flying saucer. And my very first thing I notice is I'm not tall. Like, I'm 6 foot tall. And I just was like, I'm not tall. Like, I know what it feels to be 6 foot tall. I'm not tall. And Yvonne goes, Mike, look down at yourself. So I look down at my hands. I've got these long, skinny fingers. I've got this tight, spacesuit on, and I'm super skinny. And I look to my right and left, and there's these gray beings that are the same height and size of me. And I'm the same as them. And I'm like, and I kind of go to Yvonne, I think I'm a gray alien. And she doesn't skip a beat. She just goes, Mike, what just happened? What happens next? And I'm in this room that could not possibly be on a flying saucer. It's like a ugly conference room that you would have like at a cheap hotel in Muncie, Indiana, or something like that. It's got beige carpeting and fluorescent lights and plastic folding tables and ugly wallpaper. And I'm standing there in front of what feels like a tribunal, or like I'm on trial, or like I'm at a grand jury hearing or something. So I'm standing there and I go, why am I here? And at this table, there was this kind of fuzzed out people behind this table. And I can't say that I saw their faces, but I would say they sure seemed like they would be these gray aliens. Here, I'm going to take an aside here. This is funny. I told this story to a shaman one time. And he just like, whoa, Mike, you lost me. You lost me at the gray aliens, like at the table. And I said, okay, sorry, that's my memory. That's all I got. And he said, if you had said there were a bunch of crows, there were instead of 8 gray beings, if there were 8 crows, I'd be right there with you. I'm like, okay. And so, okay, what would the word you would want to use? What's the word you would want to use? And he said, I would use what's the vocabulary word as a shaman that you would use for those crows? He said, those would be your guides, your spirit guides. Like, I'm totally fine with that. This is years later I had these conversations. Okay, so back to the story. These beings, I have this kind of argument with them that they said, you chose to do this and be here and do this. And I was like arguing with them, and it got pretty heated. I'm swearing and stuff like that. And the implication is that I chose to incarnate here on Earth to play some role. Like, I'm basically scream in the recording, like, they want me to play some role, and then whoosh, I snap out of it, and I'm back in the hypnotherapist's couch seemingly, and we have this long conversation, and I couldn't access any more of that story. But she asked, and Mike, what is your connection with owls? She did exactly what I asked. I said, ask me what's up with the owls. And this, I did not skip a beat. I said, the owls aren't important. Huh. And then I said this little thing that came out almost like a little poem almost, or the way it just came out. It's only a couple sentences long. I said, and I could do this pretty close right up from my memory. I said, I am an artist, and I know how people take in a story and how they need a symbol. The owl is not important. The owl is a symbol on a door. The owl is the owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is not important. We are on this side of the door in a tight, claustrophobic hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness.
Huh.
So you asked a very simple question, like, oh, do you have any out-of-body experiences, OBE stories? And I'm like, well, I got one, so there's my OBE story. And I don't trust the story as literally true. I certainly trust it as a powerful story with a symbolic and metaphoric resonance. Let me also add, you trace the day that I was sleeping there in the sand on the side of the road in 2013. You trace that forward. I did the hypnosis in 2018, but I started writing I started writing this book less than 48 hours after that night in the sand. And part of that time was the first 24 hours was me like making maps and trying to figure out what might have happened on that night. I called MUFON, I called sheriff's departments. I drew pictures. I found out the GPS coordinates of the spot. I was wildly possessed trying to figure out what might have happened that night. And then the next day I started writing the book that has come to define my life.
Huh.
Go on.
Do you think anything happened to you that first experience you had when the sky turned orange when you were a kid?
Oh boy, I've sure heard enough stories I could.
You have no memory of anything ever coming?
I've never looked into that one through hypnosis. It's funny. I've had, you do this kind of work and you end up meeting psychics and the psychics kind of say, I've told that story, they say, you don't want to look into that one. They're like, oh, they have a bad vibe about that. Like, you don't want to go to that one. So, but this one I had no fear associated at all with the event on that night in the desert in southern Utah.
Right. Huh. That's interesting.
Sorry, forgive me if I went on too long, but yeah.
No, that's all right. She's mute. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Swamp Kitty was about to
I had a black cat. I love black cats more than I can ever say. I've had more than one black cat. I love them so dearly.
She was an abuse case. Now she's my
She looks pretty lovey-dovey now, yeah.
Yeah, she either loves me or she's trying to take my face off. But I love her.
Speaking of cats, do you ever get any stories with cats?
Don, hold your roll, buddy. I got a question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'd have to think, but I may have some, but I can't think of one off the top of my head right now.
I abuse my co-host. Okay.
I saw an opening.
You said, shh. I'm trying to formulate a thought, sir, and you're just kidding. It's hard for me. Time change. I call that time change. Do you get a lot of reports when the time is changing? Because time change took place that night that led you to write your book and those events. Do you get a lot of time change? Like
missing time?
Days? No, like when the time changes.
Oh, that time of the daylight savings time? No, I think that was just a funny little happenstance that night that was like, I was already kind of stressed out, like something happened tonight, like I'm like driving in the car, like I think something happened last night, and then the clock didn't match what the guy in the radio was saying. So
I'm Cole says, I remember walking outside one night around 2 a.m. The sky was orange and it sounded like there was a highway in the sky. Wow. That coincides with exactly what we were talking about.
And this is outside the bounds of like what people want to discuss when they look into these, like as people want the UFO to be a metal spaceship that comes from another planet, and it's filled with people who are similar to us evolutionarily. They're like a little different, but they're essentially us. Like we go to Yellowstone National Park in a helicopter to study the grizzly bears, and these flying saucer occupants come to planet Earth to study the humans. You can make an analogy that way. Like it falls apart because I don't think the bears in Yellowstone are like seeing the sky turned orange, or they have magical healing abilities, or they have missing time. I mean, they have missing time events like that, but they don't have the consciousness aspects or the psychological aspects or the psychic aspects that show up in the reports, which is so common.
All right, Don, go for it, buddy.
Yeah, there was another. I had another question for you. Have you ever had stories of people showing up somewhere else with the time jumps?
Ooh, I could probably think of some stories. I could probably think of some, but I'm drawing a blank now.
Okay, I was just wondering. And how long is the longest time?
Well, there's one researcher who says that someone went left for a year.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
And then sometimes it's really strange. So sometimes people will be
they don't remember that. It's just a second.
Oh, they feel like they can remember the whole year.
Oh,
and
okay.
and then or that they. Here's one that I'm not super familiar with that one, but it's not uncommon for people to be gone. They'll like go out to a dinner or a party or something like that, and they'll drive home, and then they'll get home and there'll be some missing time, and then the man will have like 5 days worth of beard growth when he had shaved just a few hours earlier. And then there was like a UFO contact event. So the implication is he was taken away for 5 days and then placed back into the car at that same moment, and then arrived home where he had lived 5 extra days because his beard growth said as much.
Have any explanations about those time jumps?
I mean, I don't know how that works, right. But you can extrapolate. I don't know how else to. I mean, yeah, there's a story of a little kid. He was a teenager and he was at like a Boy Scout camp, and he like went into the woods and hid and smoked a cigarette, and he's kind of in the woods, and then he's smoking, like lit the cigarette, and this flying saucer lands and he's taken on board, and he has the whole thing, the typical, like all kinds of things happened on this flying saucer, like the hours and hours and hours, and he was taught things in medical exams, and then he's like flying saucer lands, he gets off the flying saucer, and then he's standing right back in the same spot, and the cigarette hasn't burnt down. And then the kids and all the camp counselors and the other kids are looking for him. It gets very strange. The time slips. It's much. I mean, I had the event where I feel like I don't have any memory of something that would have lasted approximately 2 hours when I was 12 years old. Right. These stories are common. What I can say is I'm not doing that kind of research necessarily. Like the stories people are telling me, sometimes they have the fellow AO or OA.
AAO.
Yeah, his story is like when he said he had a missing time, and then the owl with the feather, and then coming home, and these are the details that are very, very common in the stories. Yeah.
Squash and Holler, he said 2 things. He said that he was driving one day and lost 70 miles. Just lost it. And but he also says my friend Don, former game warden, lost time and a thick fog appeared. He drove blind, basically did not know until he ended up in a small town. He never crossed the main highway, which he had to.
Ooh, I've heard these kinds of stories. Yeah.
That's pretty.
So seriously, like people with the UFO contact experience in their life will drive down driving down the road. They'll go through a little town, whatever, Smithville. I just made that up. They go through the town of Smithville. They drive. They leave Smithville. It's in the rearview mirror, and then they keep on driving, and then they go right through Smithville again.
You bring it up.
People together in a car, more than one person in the car, have these experiences at the same time. Yeah.
You bringing up all the little North Carolina towns.
Okay. Well, I think I get it. Yeah.
Let's see. Thick fog is associated with the Oz effect, which shows up often in accounts of high strangeness. PJ kind of had a fog around her when she had her Bigfoot sight, and she said a fog come around. You get any of that? You've heard of that before?
Yep. It's not common, but it's part of. it's a small percentage, but yeah, it's certainly something I've heard many times. Yeah.
Don, I know you have more in you.
Yeah, there was another one. Geez, what was I going to ask him? Yeah, I know. I was going to say that I had heard a story of a guy driving out in the Midwest, and he passed a gas station, and he saw himself at the gas station getting gas. And then him later on having to turn back and go get gas, and the guy was gone.
Was he seeing himself like in a little time slip there? Yeah.
Yeah, he saw himself getting gas, and he didn't quite know what to make of it, but for some reason he had to go back there and get gas. And the guy was gone. It was just him there. And then, I think the story was that he saw himself drive by.
Yeah. So this is the guy on the couch with seeing himself walk into the living room with a can of Coke. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Those are strange.
So the Oz effect. The Oz effect is something. It's a term that was coined by Jenny Randall. She's a UFO researcher who wrote a lot of books in the 60s and 70s. She's still kicking. She's still alive, and she's in England, and she was. What happens when people report these events? They often, one of the overwhelming things is a unique silence, and it's not simply that the forest is quiet. It's that it's too quiet. There's no sound of leaves ruffling. There's no sound of people often say that, the flying saucer flew overhead and it had silent flight. But it's more than that. It's that everything turned silent. So there's a weird silence. When I talked about the experience I had when I saw the 5 beings out my window, I was struggling because there was something distorted about reality. And how do you say, reality wasn't right, something was distorted? I could easily, and I did for many years, it could have just been a dream. I'm certainly open to that. But the number of synchronicities connected to it and the emotional angst that surrounds that night implies, I can't know for sure, but it implies that perhaps something more than a dream took place. It would be safe to say it was dream-like, but it didn't match any other dream I've ever had. For instance, that night in my room, the room looked like my own room and everything. But yeah, so that eerie silence and that timelessness and that strange, distorted reality is something that gets reported commonly.
But you get silence right before a lot of Bigfoot encounters too. So I mean, that's where all the weirdness comes. But AAO, I lost my hearing and could not hear out of my ears during all of my encounters. I was deaf for days afterwards. Is that a common occurrence?
I've never heard that, but that's the kind of detail that I'm not surprised by hearing that, but I've never heard exactly that. I've heard other strange things. Person seemed to be taken on board a craft and left his glasses, didn't have his glasses. He should have been unable to see things clearly, but he was able to see just fine on board the craft, which doesn't make any sense without his glasses. So something more complex, like if the bear needed glasses and got taken on the helicopter, I don't think he would have perfect vision all of a sudden. That's a bad analogy.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna recommend AAO is when you email him, put AAO at the show in the subject line, so it'll ring a bell, because I really think you two need to connect. But I'm sorry, Don, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was wondering, has anybody ever suffered any health effects from?
Yeah.
What other types of health problems they may have?
It's what appear to be radiation sickness.
Oh.
Oftentimes, like nausea, hair loss, weird fingernail growth, burned eyes is very common. Like looking into an arc welder's light kind of burns. Like the person goes to the doctor. My vision's since that night. My vision's been bad, and the doctor, the optometrist, looks in and said, "Do you work as an arc welder? Have you been looking into?" And like, nope. Did you so? So there's actually that's part of it too.
Like that Men in Black device where they flash them and they forget their memory goes away.
Yeah. That was. I think those things whoever wrote the Men in Black scripts was obviously reading the UFO literature. Yeah.
Right.
Bruises on your body. Yeah. Inability to sleep. Often like other personality changes, nervousness.
Oh.
Implants in your ears that look like metal cocoons. I've never heard them described as cocoons. Wow, that's pretty interesting right there.
But an implant in the ear is very commonly reported.
Back to the owls for 1 sec. Do many of the owls speak?
Telepathically. Yeah, lots of stories about people. Yeah.
Just telepathically? They don't
just telepathically. So I've never heard. Well, they certainly hoot and they'll make owl noises and such like that in the forest, where people talk about the hooting of an owl. But the almost this is actually consistent in fairy lore and almost all UFO contact experiences. When people are interacting with the beings, they can talk and converse, but it's all telepathic. Nobody's lips are moving. So yeah, okay. I got some stories where people have telepathic Q&As with an owl. Yeah.
Wow. TKP, I want to go back on that. TKP said we had 2 owls come from the ridges. When they got to us, they changed into a coyote crazy sound. The moment I touched the truck door, it went quiet. So I wonder what would have happened if I didn't run. Wow. Coyotes and owls, you said it before the show. Coyotes and owls seem to be something.
Yeah, and so deer and owls and stuff too. So yeah, so some owls like a barred owl can make a weird racket too. So there's that that's not really coyote like, but yeah. So
no, I've heard the Bigfoot go from barred owl vocals right to coyote vocals, and then go to like a loon or something. They mix it up.
I had just said something. What did I say before? You wanted me to follow up on it? Was
corresponding with the conversations with the owls. I find that so intriguing.
So a woman, her name is Karis, and she had all kinds of like seeming UFO experiences. She felt like she's had these experiences, but she never had any of the confirmation events. She didn't have like the event that really nailed it. And she woke up one morning and said, "Today's the day. Today is the day I'm going to have the event. I'm going to get my confirmation. I'm going to see an alien today." She just knew it. So she's walking in the woods. She had this funny story. She'd walk on the path, and people wouldn't notice her. They would walk right by her and didn't even notice her. And she's like, what a weird thing. So that's an odd detail to this story. So she's on the path, and then she's like, well, I'm going to walk off the path. And so she steps off the path, and she walks into the woods, and she sees this big rock, and she says, I'll sit on that rock. And then she's sitting on the rock, and she's kind of like, it's almost like she's being directed, like, no, not there. Sit it a little over here. Not that far over. Go back a little bit. No, wait, yeah, right here. Sit here. So she's like, okay. So she's sitting there. She's kind of like, what am I doing here? And then she's like, looks straight ahead of her, and there's these bushes, and there's this sort of tunnel in the bushes where she can see, like, it's like a little, like, it's just framing this little face that's looking at her. And she's like, that is an owl. It's full daylight. That's an owl. Now, she had been doing fairy research into Celtic fairy lore, and she was kind of immersed in the fairy research at the time. So she's looking at this owl, and she looks at it, and she thinks to herself, are you an ET or are you a fairy? And then she hears this telepathic voice in her mind that says, why can't I be both? You're both.
Wow.
And then she went on, I have this recorded. I recorded this conversation. She went on to describe what sounds like a psychedelic trip. She talked about just like losing her place in reality, just slipping into this otherworldly realm and having this download of information and learning and spirituality. And then she eased back into the forest again. And this all was preceded by her saying, I'm going to have my confirmation event today.
Huh.
Wow. AAO says the ship that I was on was its own living, breathing thing inside. There was no furniture. It was made out of fleshy material, and it was also felt like liquid energy, like if you could touch water and not get wet.
I've heard, yeah, I've heard this many times where people will describe the inside of the craft as like the craft itself as a conscious living entity, as if it was grown to be a craft. And then there's many, many stories about people saying like, "Oh gosh, I'm in the like the UFO occupants will say, have a seat." And there's no chair, and then like organically this chair just morphs out of the structure of the craft, like a.
Wow, I have two things here. He was asking one of his friends if he had any types of like sounds. Are there any other birds that people have encounters with, like whippoorwills?
Oh, whippoorwills. As far as these kind of encounters, well, there's certainly highly ravens. It would be North America. It would be ravens, owls, eagles, and that those have a big booming kind of power to them. And then they're very light. Hummingbirds, lots of hummingbird stories. Hummingbirds have a very playful energy. Like people play music,
vibration,
like weddings, hummingbirds show up and stuff like so. I have a total different energy. Hummingbird has a totally different energy than the heavy energy of the owl. One's
playful and one demands respect.
Dragonflies too show up in some of these stories, and that's not a bird, but it's obviously it's a winged animal. Yeah, bats. I've got some bat stories too.
You too. I'm Cold says, have you ever hear the all colors Sam story? Have
no.
You ever heard the all colors?
Is this talking about colors? I've heard here's something that shows up a lot. People will just see a craft and they'll say, I can't describe the craft because it was a color that I've never seen before. That's very common.
Huh.
Oh, okay.
Or they'll say the craft sparkled like a faceted diamond showing colors that I've never seen before.
So let me ask you this about yourself, Mike. With everything that you have, all the knowledge you've gathered, all the people that have shared their story, all the data that you're getting in, what have you learned about yourself?
Oh, what have I learned about myself?
Mm-hmm.
I beat myself up a lot because I feel like I don't have the time in the day to do as much as I need to do. So I do take it, like I feel bad that I can't respond thoughtfully to everyone who's reached out to me. I wish I could. I simply don't have the time in the day.
I have a similar question.
Do
you feel that you were chosen to write about this? This was your calling?
So what I can say is I can, like, I'm so funny this way, and people like get mad at me, like, Mike, you need to just suck it up and like say what's what. And I'm like, well, all I can say is what truly feels honest to me. Like that doesn't feel honest to me to say I was chosen. That does not feel honest to me. But I can sort of like tell the story that I just told you, where like I had that contact, what seems to be a contact experience on the side of the road in Utah, and then 48 hours later I start writing this book. I was on fire writing that book. And then I can also say that this book here, the first one, more so than the other ones, took on a synchronistic magic where I would be writing a chapter, let's say, and I would be like, oh, this chapter isn't working. And like the chapter takes up a number of stories, whether it's owls and shamanism or owls and pop culture or owls and death. And I'm like, I just need the right story to finish this chapter up. And oftentimes I would go to bed at night and I would wake up the next morning and that story had arrived in my email inbox. Like, this is the perfect story to finish this chapter. That happened with such regularity that I just began to depend on it while writing that book. Do I feel I was chosen? I could dance around that one and tell it in a way where I could say like, oh, isn't this interesting? Like, doesn't this story allude to the fact that I may be chosen? But I'm from Michigan. I'm from Michigan, and I'm just like, my parents were like, don't you toot your own horn, So I think that's inbred in me not to take that next step. But I can sure speculate that I was chosen to write these books and to do this research.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like all your experience led you to this throughout your life, you know.
I'm like you're not saying anything I
Okay.
haven't been wrestling with for the last 15 years. Yeah.
Right.
Do you feel like you're still trying to find your way?
Yeah. Oh, you know what has happened is I'm much calmer now. Before, like you can in the book The Messengers, you can feel the angst. I'm wrestling with these issues. I feel like I've come to terms with this more, and I can be a little more grounded. Even I just had a little bit of coffee here. I'm kind of a chatty box
You're
right now.
fine.
But
Can
but
you?
I feel like I'm more grounded in you know what I feel like I've gone through people go it happens in people's lives, right? You have a death and rebirth experience. You graduate from college, you do this thing. I never graduated from college, but I should use a different analogy. So you have these experiences in your life where you have one part of your life, one chapter of your life ends and another one begins. And it feels like when I started this owl research, wow, did all these other chapters of my life just slam shut. And I started this new chapter that has been wildly rewarding in so many ways. And the takeaway is, as I tried to say earlier, is I now live in a magical universe where I just see this stuff and am capable of recognizing it in the moment in a way that I never would have before setting out on this newer journey, this newer chapter of my life.
We have a
And
gentleman. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Don.
no, I was just going to ask how many books you had out total.
Well, I've got some camping ones. So the
Oh,
books that I've written, I've got 4. Here, you want me to do it? I can show them. Go ahead.
Yes, I was
Yes.
going to ask you
Okay.
that.
So this is the first one is The Messengers. That was written in 2015. That's where I made the argument that owls and UFOs are somehow connected. The next one is Stories from the Messengers. This has got Don's story in the tree, the deer hunting in the tree. This is basically stories that didn't fit into the first book. The third book is Hidden Experience. This is sort of my memoir, and this would be a memoir of my coming to terms with my experience. I was doing a blog, and the blog turned into my real-time diary, and so I kind of used that as the framework for that. And then the fourth book is a fiction book. It's called The Unseen. This was a lot of work, but this was a pandemic project. So I was kind of like me and the rest of the world were holed up, and I wrote this book
yeah.
over the pandemic. The owl and UFO research has I'll say a flavor and mood to it that it's palpable and recognizable. And I took these available stories from my own life and from the accounts I had collected and put it into this fiction book. It's a UFO story where I never use the word UFO. So there. And then here's the
Wow.
thing. So if you stack the 3 nonfiction books up, it's 1,000 pages, right? It's almost exactly 1,000 pages. And people say, Mike, you gonna write another book? And I'm like, wow, if I can't say it in 1,000 pages, it's not gonna do anyone any good for me to like write another big fat book. That's I could write 50 books. It'd be the same story over and over again. It'd be the same story that AAO is telling. It's the same story that's arriving in my inbox. Like these stories are remarkable. They need to be put out there, and I guess I should figure out a way to get them out there. But
Are
I
all
agree with
your
that.
are all your stories and accounts from North America?
all over the world. Like
All
oh my
over.
god,
Okay.
like people from like some broken English. I mean, all over.
Oh, okay. And the
It's
owl,
limited a little bit because I can only speak English. So that's
right?
you can I've gotten some pretty broken people translating themselves, but yeah, all over the world.
Um, you've given a lot of people closure too, because they have a place to go. I know you said you would come back on the show and we would talk about your ultralight
Yes,
backpacking and some
yes.
wilderness. But there's also a gentleman in chat. I don't know if he'll do it or not, but his name is John. He's had some experiences. I wouldn't mind just having you guys on for
Great.
for a powwow. I'll get someone to talk really sweet with him and see if he'll come on. But I think that would be a wonderful conversation. And maybe once that AOA reaches out to you, that's something you can help them out too, because I
Sure.
mean, it seems like that's something that's still going on. But I do want to thank you for being a open source to people. When you're going, it's just like a Bigfoot encounter, and it just typically is a Bigfoot show, but there's so much high strangeness around both subjects that kind of correspond. But it's just like when you have an encounter with Bigfoot or strangeness out there, it it really doesn't matter what culture you're from. You get ridiculed by, that we call it the outside world. So having a sounding board and having someone that doesn't ridicule you and listens, it makes the world a difference. Because I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, but I'm
Hmm.
going to say it. You are making a difference, and I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. And I it's, as I said before, like that's like, I feel like I wish I could do more. I wish I could do more. And yeah, so thank you.
John just said, I'm in, Miss V. So we'll correspond. You said you're pretty much open, right? So maybe we'll do it in January.
Great, anytime, anytime. I love
Yeah,
to talk about the camping stuff.
Oh,
It's nice to talk about something other than owls sometimes. Yeah.
we'll do a John show and a camping show all in one, and John can go over some of his experiences, and how you guys can just go back and forth about the strangeness. Don, is there anything you want to say in closing?
I did just want to say that I didn't look up any of your information purposely beforehand because I really wanted to hear everything right from you.
Wellness.
Yeah, and I find you very credible. I
Well, I
enjoyed
mean,
this.
thank you.
Yeah,
I recognize sometimes there's some stories I got to be careful, like to
yeah,
the story about the hypnosis session is so powerful for me. And at the same time, I'm like, I got to be clear that I don't trust it myself. But
right.
when I tell it, I've got to make sure to say that it's like I'm presented with a mystery that I don't know what's what as far as what's true, like literally true. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
So
just to
thanks. Yeah.
have that memory in you, I mean, that should tell you something, you know.
Well, but I believe me, I've read, I've spent the last 20 years like kind of obsessively reading and researching the UFO topics. So there was nothing in that story that
Oh,
showed up
right,
that
right.
wasn't, that
Okay.
I hadn't already read somewhere. So I could have confabulated that out of the file cabinets in my brain are pretty full. So, but yeah, so thank you. Yeah. Oh, good, good. You know what? I try to be a credible person telling incredible stories.
You
Yes,
are. You've
which is
nailed
hard
that
to,
one, sir.
yeah, and it's hard to do. A lot of people can't pull it off, you know.
I do believe you have nailed that one, sir. So at the end of each show, I always give the guest a few moments to pay tribute to anyone in their life. Is there anyone you would like to pay tribute to?
Oh, a researcher named Leo Sprinkle died a couple years ago, and I host a podcast myself, and I did a podcast dedicated to Leo Sprinkle. Leo Sprinkle was a professor at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, and then he left. He's a not a medical doctor. He's a psychologist. He has a degree in psychology, and he was really dedicated to helping people. He did UFO research, and he did UFO investigations. So in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, he was 92 and he died a couple years ago. So and right up until the end, he was this incredibly gregarious, sweet, smiling, open-hearted man. So that would be like, if I have a role model, that's someone that I and he was also he was a scholar. He was an academic, so he had an academic rigor to the way he presented his research, and I really look to him as someone I just feel so blessed I had the chance to meet and the chance to call him my friend.
Oh, nice.
It's pretty awesome. Well, Mike, welcome to the Not So
Yep.
Perfect Bigfoot family. You are a part of the family now,
This
sir.
was great. This was a joy.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have you back sometime in January, and John can jump onto you, and we'll go into some of that ultralight backpacking and some wilderness stuff. And Give out your podcast and your website before you go. We'll end it there.
So the main hub of my podcast, the main hub to find everything, including my podcast, is MikeClelland.com. That's all one word, Mike Clelland, MikeClelland.com. If you can't remember that, you can just Google UFO owls, and I'm the first thing that comes up. I'm on the next 50 things underneath that, and then you'll be able to find that website there. The podcast is called Hidden Experience, and it might be under Hidden Experience Audio. But that's the podcast, and I only do 1 or 2 shows a month, and they've been pretty heartfelt. They're like I'm talking with friends and acquaintances that I really want to talk with. I did a podcast for a while, once a week, and I couldn't keep up with it. Just couldn't keep up with it, and but once a month or 1 or 2 a month seems great. So that's been really rewarding to. And the focus is the very personal experiences that people have.
One question to you before you, I'm sorry, Don.
No, go ahead.
One question for you before you go. Have you ever heard of a craft that was about the size of a football field? Now I'm just going by memory, and it had the 3 red rectangular lights. No sound, no downwind, no nothing.
So what was the shape of the craft itself? Is it?
I just remember seeing the lights were like 1 light up front and 2 in the back, like a rectangle, and it was about the size of a football field. I mean, it was huge.
I've never heard exactly that shape, but that's the size and So that doesn't surprise me at all. That seems like it would. I'm not doing that type of research where I would keep an archive of those shapes, but sure, that seems, given the oftentimes people will talk a triangular craft in that size, but yeah. But
there was one like that that went through like Ohio or something, where all the police departments were following it somewhere over in that area. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was one that went right by through where was George W. Bush's ranch in Texas, in Waco, Texas. It was a great big giant Walmart-sized big craft that floated right over the whole community. Yeah.
Someone said it was from a military craft. So back then we had Pope Air Force Base, but it's just always stood out for me. But I wanted to get that in there. I have enjoyed you. I think that the people in chat have just really just embraced your work and what you have shared with us tonight. I do hope you come back, and hopefully we'll get into some more of your books down the road. And I just think you're absolutely amazing.
Yes, well, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Very interesting.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. This has been great. Yeah, I loved it. So I'm really happy to do the podcast, and I got to say the ones that seem to be the most fun and have the best questions are often shows like yours, where they're not associated with a big, radio station or anything like that. Yeah. So.
Oh, well, thank you. It pays to be just a little guy sometimes.
Oh, it's great. It's the best. Yeah, you get the best. The grassroots are much better than the mainstream.
The real people. Right.
Yeah.
All right, the underdog. Well, thank you for coming on, everybody in chat. If I missed anyone in chat, I apologize. I think I missed Tammy when she was on. So, hey, Tammy, and thank you for joining us. And Mike, you're wonderful. And Don, you're just a pain in my butt. See you later.
I strive.
I look forward to being back. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Mike.